Hi, I'm Morella, and I was never really invited, just tolerated. They sent out the seating chart for the big family meeting. Everyone had a place. Everyone had a nameplate, except me. Zinnia, my husband's sister, called me just a wife for convenience, then laughed while her teenage niece echoed, Mrs. Nobody. But what none of them knew was, I wasn't there to be seen. I was there to watch. And when her fiancé asked, Wait, you're the judge? That's when the silence hit harder than any insult they'd rehearsed. So why did they use my name on legal documents while pretending I didn't exist? And why was I erased from the family photo, but still the one holding the evidence? What happens when the person you've ignored turns out to be the one holding all the leverage? The kitchen was quiet, the way it usually was around 7:30 a.m., before the chaos of emails, meetings, and Gideon's rehearsed sighs filled the air. I stood by the window, coffee in hand, watching the neighbor's dog attempt to chase down a squirrel it would never catch. I'd always found that oddly relatable. Gideon walked in, already dressed in business casual, blue checkered shirt, half tucked like he wanted to look both serious and laid back. He was scrolling on his phone, eyebrows lifted in that expression he used when pretending to be surprised by something he'd clearly expected. Oh, he said. Zinnia just sent out the details for the investment meeting next week. Whole family's looping in. I didn't respond. Instead, I set my cup down and reached for my own phone. No new emails. Refresh. Still nothing. He must have noticed the pause, or maybe just my silence. Maybe it's in your spam folder, he said, already returning to his feed. It wasn't, and we both knew it. By the time I opened the attached PDF he forwarded, my stomach had already made the leap ahead of my brain. There it was. A full itinerary for the family's annual investment strategy retreat. 9 names listed, carefully sorted by role, title, spouse. My name wasn't among them, not even as Gideon's +1. The one person in the family who held a federal judicial appointment was nowhere to be found in a document meant to plan multi-million-dollar decisions. I've prosecuted people for less deliberate omissions. What do you think? Gideon asked, still oblivious or pretending to be. Looks pretty packed, huh? I took a beat, then measured. I noticed my name's not listed. He blinked, casually placing his phone face down on the counter. It's probably just a formality. You know how Zinnia is. Everything with her is optics. Then came the quieter blow. Anyway, it's probably best if you just come to listen, not stir things up. These things get tense fast. There it was. Not an oversight, not a glitch, a setup. They always want silence, I said, more to myself than to him, especially from the ones who've seen too much. He didn't ask what I meant. He never did. All day I debated whether to go. I wasn't afraid of them. I wasn't even angry, not exactly. What I felt was older than that. It had edges and shape, and an aftertaste that never quite faded. I'd felt it before, in college, when I was overlooked for a fellowship because they assumed someone like me couldn't connect with community clients. I'd felt it when I first stepped into a courtroom and watched male associates wince every time I spoke. I knew this feeling. I just hadn't expected to feel it here, not at this point in my life. I stood in the closet, fingers grazing over a row of jackets. My hand landed on the black wool one, sleek, simple, structured. The one I wore when I knew the truth might make people uncomfortable. I laid it gently on the bed, smoothed the sleeves out like I was ironing strategy into the fabric. I wasn't going for them. I wasn't going to be heard. I was going to witness. Before bed, I walked past Gideon's desk. His workspace was always cluttered. Receipts, notepads, framed photos. My eyes caught one in particular. A picture of us from our anniversary trip to Sedona, half obscured by a stack of budget reports. The frame was tilted away from the door, out of view. Unseen, unless you were searching. Funny how quickly someone could become a background object in their own home. I grabbed a sticky note from the drawer, scribbled 2 words in black ink, and stuck it on the underside of the frame. "You'll remember. Maybe not today, maybe not next week, but someday when the picture finally fell over and he picked it up to reset it, he'd see the words and recall the silence that started it all." And just like that, I knew. Silence would be my sharpest weapon. I arrived 5 minutes early, like always. Not too eager, not late enough to be noticed. The building was as polished as its tenants, glass walls, gold accents, and that cold neutrality that only money could buy. The top-floor boardroom, with its mahogany table that seemed to stretch for miles, had been staged like a press event. Nameplates, waters, and leather portfolios at every seat. Except mine. A young server holding a tray of cucumber-infused water glanced at me with the practiced politeness of someone trained not to ask questions. "Are you with legal support?" she asked. I smiled without teeth. "Something like that." She gestured toward the far end of the table, near the coffee station. An afterthought space, convenient for stepping out, not for being central. I walked over without a word, settling into the seat with the worst view of the screen and the best angle for watching everyone else. I scanned the table. Vera had her nameplate etched in brass. Gideon's read Vice President, Finance, and Zinnia, of course, had hers positioned dead center, larger than necessary. The others were there too, cousins, uncles, even a third cousin once removed, who hadn't been seen since Thanksgiving 3 years ago. Every name accounted for. Every person framed. Except me. I felt her presence before I saw her. Zinnia entered like a performance. Stilettos clicking, hair coiled to perfection, a scent trail that smelled expensive and designed to linger. She made a point to hug 3 people in front of me, then looked my way. "Morning," she said, voice thin as air. "Zinnia." She turned to her fiancé, Alaric, looping her arm through his as if I wasn't there. "Everyone ready? Let's get started. It's going to be a packed agenda." As the small talk buzzed around the room, Zinnia raised her voice just enough to float over the chatter. "You know, Morella married into the family, but she didn't exactly build it." Laughter, just light enough to pretend it wasn't cruel. I caught the awkward glance from one of the cousins across the table. No one stopped her. No one pushed back. It wasn't a knife, it was a scalpel, and everyone watched it sink in. I didn't react. I didn't give her the satisfaction of an eye twitch, a breath held too long. Instead, I tucked my hands under the table and began building the case in my head. Timelines, transactions, board votes. I've always found that rage organizes quite efficiently when paired with clarity. Let them think I'm just a +1. That's always when the verdict hits hardest. Midway through the first agenda item, someone accidentally placed their purse halfway onto my lap. No apology. I shifted slightly, offering a tight smile that said, "I noticed," but not, "I care." My phone lit up. No message from Gideon. No apology. Just silence. Like always. From the corner of my eye, I watched him chuckle at a joke from a cousin he hadn't spoken to in 2 years. He looked comfortable, settled, like the room fit him and I was the piece of furniture that didn't quite match the decor. I leaned back, crossed my legs, and let my gaze drift across the table. The phrases being thrown around: revenue realignment, legacy positions, asset rebranding, were all the same as every previous year, just dressed in new jargon. But what stood out were the faces, the nods of agreement, the shared delusion that this family was built on equal footing. I wasn't watching a meeting, I was watching a deposition. Each smirk, every nonverbal dismissal, it all went into my mental record. I wasn't here to participate, I was here to document. And just as I started mentally sketching the pattern of manipulation that held this family together, my eyes landed on the back wall, on the painting that would change everything. The sound of clinking glasses and distant laughter carried through the room like background noise to a memory I wasn't supposed to keep. I remained seated at the far end of the table, arms crossed lightly, eyes scanning every corner like I was preparing for cross-examination. No one seemed to notice that I hadn't spoken once since I arrived. Or maybe they had, and preferred it that way. Across the boardroom, behind Zinnia's seat of power, stood what the family affectionately called the legacy wall. Photos of charitable events, ribbon cuttings, corporate partnerships, and, at its center, a framed portrait, prominently displayed with gallery lighting. I didn't need to walk up to know what it was, but I did anyway. I crossed the room slowly, heels muted against the carpet. From a short distance, the photo looked glossy and inclusive, Zinnia front and center, flanked by Vera, Gideon, the extended family smiling with synchronized ease. My gaze followed the faces, row by row. Smiling, recognizable, approved. And then I knew what was missing. Me. My absence wasn't subtle. It wasn't a case of a bad angle or being cut off at the frame's edge. I simply wasn't there. Which was strange, considering I remembered that night vividly. I remembered standing just out of frame, waiting for someone to call me in. I'd worn a navy blouse, one Zinnia had once said, brought out the authority in my eyes. I remembered the jokes, the champagne, the flash of the camera, but no one called my name. That realization hit deeper than I expected. Not like a slap. Too clean for that. It was more like walking into a room you didn't realize had been locked behind you. When you're left out long enough, I thought, you stop wondering if it was a mistake. The noise behind me continued. Someone mentioned golf. Someone else laughed about Vera's latest gala outfit. I stood there a moment longer, then quietly returned to my seat, back to my place by the refreshment cart. The image didn't leave me. Neither did the memory of that email, months ago, inviting me to serve as legal counsel for the family fund. Sent without subject line. Addressed simply, "We'd appreciate your signature support." As if my entire profession boiled down to ceremonial endorsement, I declined. "I don't want to represent a system that doesn't see me," I'd written. Gideon read the email and shrugged. "It's just paperwork." Zinnia, hearing about it later, had quipped over brunch. "Guess she didn't want to sign up for the sisterhood." She laughed. I didn't. Now, watching her lean into Alaric's shoulder, whispering with her glass of Sauvignon Blanc raised like a prop, I realized something. She didn't need to exile me. She just needed to erase me. And everyone went along with it. I pulled out my phone, opened a hidden folder I'd named Clarity. Inside were files I'd been quietly collecting, meeting minutes never formally recorded, misaligned expense reports, board decisions made without required signatures. I wasn't planning to use them. Not yet. This wasn't about vengeance. It was about reminding myself I wasn't invisible. I saw everything. I understood the weight of silence better than anyone here. What they didn't know was how silence sharpened perception. They thought my quiet meant I had nothing to add. What it really meant was I was compiling everything they hoped I'd miss. Let them smile for the cameras. Let them throw banquets in names they never legally secured. Let them assume their power was protected by charm and old money. I leaned back in my seat, crossed my legs, folded my arms. My gaze found Zinnia again. She was laughing now, big and theatrical, the kind of laugh that demanded approval. People leaned in, like satellites orbiting her gravity. "You can erase my face from a photo," I thought, "but you can't erase what I know." Then the voice beside me broke through the noise, low and curious. "You're not listed on the email chain either, are you?" I stayed quiet as the meeting resumed, the energy in the room shifting into something more performative. Zinnia had taken the reins again, orchestrating the conversation like it was a TED Talk and not a family fund review. She stood at the head of the table, gesturing with the confidence of someone who had never been told no and genuinely believed she'd earned the position with charm alone. I watched her with measured stillness, legs crossed, hands resting lightly in my lap. Inside my blazer pocket, I felt the small, cool shape of the USB, labeled in my own handwriting, "For when they forget." I'd written it on a night they wouldn't remember, but I never stopped replaying. A night of documents and quiet resolve. Gideon was sitting across from me. Still no eye contact. Just the occasional nod in Zinnia's direction, a chuckle here, a head tilt there. If you looked at him from the outside, you'd think he was simply navigating the room diplomatically. But I knew better. He wasn't keeping peace, he was keeping his distance. Zinnia's voice carried over the room with the clarity of someone who'd practiced in front of a mirror. "Let's not overwhelm Morella," she said lightly. "She's always been a bit sensitive to confrontation." The air tightened. A few polite chuckles scattered like marbles on tile. My heart didn't spike. It sank. This wasn't a misstep. It wasn't a slip of the tongue. It was a rehearsed jab wrapped in a smile, presented with just enough humor to dodge accountability. I'd seen attorneys do it to opposing counsel, make it sound like banter while cutting straight to the artery. Gideon remained motionless. No defense. Not even a glance. I thought about speaking, just for a second. I imagined standing, correcting the record, outlining my litigation background in federal courts, maybe even reminding them that sensitive wasn't the word they used when they needed my name on a compliance report. But I didn't. Instead, I opened the manila folder in front of me, slowly, deliberately. I pulled out the latest financial summary, scanned it, and highlighted a misalignment in column D. Zinnia's presentation hadn't accounted for a restructuring clause from last quarter. It was a minor detail, but it said everything. Let them laugh. My facts would outlive their fiction. As the meeting pushed forward, I let my mind drift. To the night I created the USB now resting against my hip. It had been after a similar meeting, the kind that left me feeling smaller than when I entered. That night, I poured a glass of wine I didn't finish, sat at my desk, and pulled open every folder I had access to. Meeting minutes, legal filings, tax schedules. I wasn't looking for dirt. I was looking for patterns. What I found was a structure of chaos disguised as legacy. Decisions made without signatures. Contracts renewed without updates. Money shuffled just neatly enough to stay legal, barely. I didn't organize the USB to burn them. I did it to remind myself that I saw it all, and more importantly, that I understood it. Not once in those files was I acknowledged as a contributor. Yet my name appeared in notations, comments, marginal mentions, like footnotes, in a story I apparently had no role in. Reviewed by MD. Confirmed with Judge Dalton. They used my name like seasoning, just enough to make it credible, never enough to credit. The meeting broke for a short recess. People stood, stretched, made their way toward the hallway. I stayed seated, slowly capping my highlighter, glancing again at the chair I'd been placed in. No nameplate, no folder printed with my title. Just a seat near the edge where interruptions go unnoticed. I reached into my bag and placed the USB into the inside pocket of my blazer, zipping it closed with the same intention I used in court. Steady, final. I wasn't going to argue. I wasn't going to plead for a seat. I don't raise my voice. I raise the stakes. And just then, someone leaned in beside me, their voice low, hesitant. "They've been using your name on contracts, haven't they?" They brought in lunch, like it was a casual celebration. White linen napkins, reusable glass bottles with lemon slices, catered platters that screamed curated wealth. I stayed seated, still near the end of the table where I'd been relegated. My food untouched, my focus deliberate. Zinnia stood, effortlessly gliding between conversations, pouring wine for people who didn't need it, laughing like she was headlining her own sitcom. The room bent toward her, smiles, subtle nods, people offering up their attention like she earned it. She thrived on that energy, the illusion of importance built on well-placed jabs and curated charm. A young server leaned toward me with a kind smile and a clipboard. "Hi, are you with support staff or part of event logistics?" I held her gaze a beat longer than necessary. "Neither, thank you." My voice calm, controlled. She nodded, slightly flushed, and disappeared. Zinnia's laugh cut across the room like a knife slipping through silk. "Oh, Morella! She's the wife of convenience, perfect for contracts, invisible for the cameras." It wasn't what she said. It was how casually she said it. How familiar the words felt, like something rehearsed. A few uneasy laughs followed, the kind you offer when you don't want to be the one not laughing. Then came the real sting. One of Zinnia's nieces, barely 16, eyes full of mimicry and makeup, turned from her seat and added, "Mrs. Nobody, right?" Silence. I didn't flinch, not externally, but inside, something steadied, something old, something I'd carried through courtrooms and consultations and dinner tables where no one passed me the wine, but everyone expected me to refill their glasses. When a child repeats it, you know it's not an insult, it's a family script. Across the table, Gideon looked up briefly. Our eyes met for the first time since the meeting began. He didn't say a word, just gave me that look. 1 part apology, 2 parts request. Please don't make this worse. Please don't make a scene. They trained him well, I thought. Peace over truth. Image over respect. I could have torn the room open. I could have laid out every instance where my signature had kept this family from financial exposure. Every document I'd reviewed that they hadn't even read. Every time I was called upon to fix what their vanity broke. Instead, I smiled. Not warmly, just enough. If I'm so invisible, I said clearly, why do I appear on every tax document your fund has filed in the last 5 years? The room stilled. Forks hovered midair. Someone's glass clinked too hard against the table. No one responded, not even Zinnia. I didn't press it. I didn't have to. The silence did the rest. I reached into my tote bag and pulled out a manila folder. I didn't open it. I didn't reference it. I just placed it next to my untouched lunch and let it sit. Let them wonder what's inside, I thought. Let them sweat before I ever speak. Across the room, Zinnia smiled too big. Gideon adjusted his tie. And for once, I didn't feel out of place. I felt inevitable. And that's when I noticed my access badge wasn't even activated. The moment I saw the red icon next to the Wi-Fi network, I knew something was off. I tried logging in again, twice, 3 times. The system gave the same sterile response. Access denied. I glanced around the room, watching the others pull up shared drives, presentations, synchronized documents. I was holding a folder. They were moving in real time. I turned to the intern nearby, Emily, I think, and asked politely, "Could you check if my badge grants network access?" She hesitated. "I think you're not on the internal list. It says guest access only. Maybe check with IT?" I smiled with more teeth than warmth. Of course. They hadn't just kept me out of the conversation. They locked the door behind me and pretended it was always that way. During the next agenda segment, budget reallocation for charitable outreach, I pointed out a discrepancy in Zinnia's figures. The kind you don't notice unless you know what a 501c3 audit trigger looks like. I mentioned it calmly as a suggestion. Zinnia didn't miss a beat. "Let's keep the technical stuff to people trained for it," she said, flashing that signature grin. "I know you're detail-oriented, Morella, but this isn't really your field, is it?" No one laughed this time, but no one defended me either. Gideon took a slow sip of water. Vera tilted her head toward a cousin and said something about vendor contracts, shifting the room away from me like a spotlight being turned off mid-scene. I didn't flinch. Instead, I folded my hands on the table and stared straight at Zinnia. Not with anger, precision. My mind cataloged every detail. Timestamp. Tone. Who looked down? Who looked away? Who smirked and pretended they didn't? That's what makes the final move so powerful, I thought. They never saw you as a player. I took my phone from my bag, tapped out a message to myself. Subject line, Pretrial Observations. I attached a photo of the document error and the quote Zinnia just tossed out. Nothing threatening, just record-keeping. 10 minutes later, I leaned toward a cousin who'd worked with me on legal reviews before. I asked for a digital copy of the previous quarter's grant schedule. She stiffened, glanced toward Zinnia, and whispered, "She said you wouldn't need it. Said everything you'd want was already printed." This wasn't an oversight, it was orchestration. And just like that, her voice, her words, her tone, they went into the file. This wasn't personal anymore, it was procedural. I leaned back in my seat, shifting slightly so my view encompassed the entire table. I stopped seeing family. I started seeing case subjects. Zinnia, smiling too big. Alaric, still nodding along. Vera, distracted by her own reflection in her phone. Gideon, still pretending this wasn't happening. Then, my voice, steady, measured, just loud enough. I realize I'm not officially part of this field, I said. So I assume my signature on the Foundation's last 3 years of compliance reports was an oversight? You could hear the weight drop from the air. Papers paused mid-shuffle. A fork scraped awkwardly on a ceramic plate. One of the cousins blinked twice like they didn't understand the question. But they did. I didn't smile. I didn't need to. Zinnia didn't even blink after my comment about the compliance signatures. She recovered too fast, like a magician pulling your attention back to her hands just after the card's gone missing. The next words out of her mouth were wrapped in sugar, but the intent was sharp enough to draw blood. "Morella's got such a quiet presence," she said, glancing around the table. "You forget she's here until someone needs a signature." Murmurs rippled down the line. Half laughs, half throat clearings. Some smiled politely. Others pretended not to hear. And then, the knife. "She's just a housewife with a sharp pen, right?" I heard the chair beside me shift slightly. Someone dropped a napkin and didn't bother picking it up. I turned my head slowly, scanned the room. Not for faces, but for tells. Who looked at me? Who looked away? Who checked their phone like that would somehow make them disappear? Before I could respond, Alaric, Zinnia's fiancé, spoke up. His voice was quieter than usual, almost like he was trying to solve a riddle. "Wait," he said, turning toward me. "What's your full name again?" I didn't move. "Judge Morella Dalton." Silence. You could have heard the fluorescent lights humming overhead. Even the server, carrying a tray of sparkling water, paused, unsure if she should keep walking. Across the room, I saw a cousin blink rapidly, then whisper something into his phone. An assistant at the far end of the table began typing. Fast, deliberate, the way someone does when they're Googling you on company Wi-Fi. Alaric sat back slowly. "You're the federal judge who ruled on the Eastwell case? The one that got national coverage last year?" Zinnia opened her mouth. Nothing came out. She looked like she was trying to remember a line she hadn't rehearsed for this part of the play. I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. That wasn't the point. I folded my hands together and said evenly, "The issue isn't that I'm a judge. It's that none of you thought to ask." Gideon finally looked up, a beat too late to matter. The silence was a kind of justice, not the kind you deliver in court, but the kind that settles in a room and refuses to be pushed aside. A flash from memory flickered through my head. Me, standing in a courtroom, robe on, voice echoing through chambers, men in suits hanging on every word, not because they respected me, but because they had to, because I was the authority in that space. And here, now, I was being asked if I was part of event logistics. The difference wasn't me. It was the room. And this room didn't know what to do with a woman who'd stopped needing permission. I leaned forward slightly and let my eyes trace the table again, but this time, slowly, not looking through them, at them. My voice was lower than before, more deliberate. "Just because I've been quiet," I said, "doesn't mean I haven't been watching." And then I looked at Alaric. This time, he looked away. Zinnia leaned in across the table. Her voice dipped low, just enough for me to hear, but loud enough to be overheard. "You can play judge in court?" she whispered, smile syrupy. "Here, you're just family." I turned my head slowly, met her gaze, and smiled. Not warmly, but precisely. Just enough to be mistaken for graciousness by anyone watching. I reached into my tote and pulled out a slim, cream-colored folder with the kind of stiffness that only came from properly printed legal documents. I set it down between us, then slid it into the center of the table, the flap clicking softly against the wood. Several heads turned. "This contract," I said calmly, tapping the cover once with my index finger. "Governing your family foundation? I wrote it." The air shifted. I opened the folder, flipped to the second page, and ran my finger along a paragraph about decision thresholds and board vote requirements. "Right here, the clause you ignored during this morning's vote, the one about requiring unanimous written consent for structural budget reallocations." Someone at the far end cleared their throat. Alaric leaned forward. Vera blinked, trying to follow the words. Zinnia didn't move, but her cheeks flushed just enough. "You've breached it," I added flatly. "You can pretend that's just a formality, but it has legal consequence." Gideon sat straighter. He didn't speak, didn't object, just fidgeted with his wedding band like it was spinning too loose. I closed the folder and pulled out a smaller envelope, white, sealed, hand-addressed. I placed it beside the contract, the motion slow and intentional. "My resignation," I said, tone even, "from all advisory capacities, effective immediately." Alaric's mouth opened slightly, as if to interrupt, but no words followed. "I won't stop what's coming," I continued, "but I will not be part of it either." Vera's voice broke the silence. "Is this necessary?" I turned toward her without blinking. "You should have asked that before you used my name on tax filings I never saw." I wasn't shouting. I didn't have to. The words were more cutting that way. A cousin near the end of the table had already pulled out his phone, whispering into it, probably to someone in legal, or PR. Zinnia's hand trembled slightly as she reached for her water. The power in the room shifted. Tangibly. Everyone felt it. That quiet slide from dominance to damage control. I stood, gathered my folder and phone, slid the chair in with a firm hand. On my way out, I paused by the doorway. Just once. "You had access to my signature," I said. "You never had my consent." I walked out, the hush behind me, not from politeness, but from panic. Then I heard Gideon's voice through the door, low, uncertain, asking if the prenup could be reviewed. I hadn't made it halfway down the hallway when I heard him. Alaric's voice, low and tight, slipped through the crack in the door behind me. "That prenup? Did you say she drafted it?" I didn't stop walking, but my feet slowed just enough. My hand gripped the strap of my bag a little tighter. I kept going, not because I didn't want to hear more, but because I already knew the rest. Back in my car, parked in the same corner spot they'd assigned me years ago, I opened my tablet and connected to the secure server I used for consulting work. My fingers moved with muscle memory, pulling up the document registry I maintained for the family fund. I tapped into the prenup folder. There it was. I clicked open the original draft. My notes were still there. Highlighted recommendations, suggested edits, a comment bubble on Clause 7C about mutual asset disclosure. Then I opened the final version. The language had changed. One clause, tucked beneath a paragraph they assumed no one would read, effectively voided the spousal asset claim in the event of infidelity. And next to it, in the signature box, were my initials. Scanned, not signed. Zinnia had asked me to review the document months ago, told me it was just for internal confirmation, to make sure it followed standard formatting. "Just a formality," she'd said, waving it off like she was asking for a dinner reservation. I'd skimmed the draft, replied via email with minor recommendations, but I never approved the final. I never signed it. They wanted my title, not my terms. I leaned back in the seat and let the weight of the realization settle. It didn't hit like betrayal, it hit like pattern recognition. Of course they'd do it. It was how this family worked, leverage dressed as loyalty. I opened my notes app, typed one sentence. This was not an oversight, it was a transaction. I stared at the sentence for a while before deleting it. Not because it wasn't true, but because I didn't need to say it twice. Part of me wanted to act, to draft a formal complaint to the state bar, to contact the ethics board. My name had been misused, my credentials borrowed without consent. I could make this loud, but I didn't. Instead, I opened a new email, addressed to no one but myself. Subject line, Document Breach Timeline. I started listing dates, times, attached screenshots, then closed the draft without sending. Let them feel the fear of what I could do. Let it sit with them, every moment of every day, wondering when the next email might come. Wondering if I'd go public, if I'd forward the file to the firm, if I'd testify. I didn't need to. I only needed to remind them I could. My phone buzzed. A message from Gideon. Are you okay? No apology, no acknowledgement. Just that vague, passive line men use when they realize the house is on fire, but they're still holding the match. I ignored it. Instead, I opened my email and composed a message to Alaric. No pleasantries, no lead-in. What you signed wasn't what I reviewed. You may want to consult counsel, independently. I attached nothing, no threats, no files. Then I deleted the original draft from my drive. Burned the paper copy I'd brought home in the shred bin outside the building. Some evidence isn't meant for court. It's meant for control. My silence was never ignorance. It was precision. I turned my phone off, and for the first time in weeks, I slept through the night. The phone buzzed long before I opened my eyes. A dull, vibrating pulse that hummed against the nightstand like it was trying to whisper something I already knew. I rolled over, blinking into the screen's glow. 57 notifications, missed calls, email alerts, media pings. The subject lines told the story before I tapped a single one. Dalton speaks without speaking. Judge tied to foundation under scrutiny. She was the signature, not just the name. I sat up slowly. There was no panic in my chest, no jolt of adrenaline. Just that low, steady hum that came when the scale tipped. Not because you pushed it, but because it was never balanced to begin with. Truth doesn't knock, it breaks doors. I got out of bed, poured myself coffee, and turned on the TV. Not out of curiosity, but confirmation. There it was. A split screen. My official judicial portrait on the left. A photo of the foundation gala on the right. Zinnia mid-laugh in a gold dress, completely unaware a storm was coming for her. The anchor read from a teleprompter. Judge Marella Dalton, known for her ruling in the Eastwell litigation, has been named in several internal documents from the Dalton Pierce Family Foundation, raising questions about the use of legal signatures without proper authority. I sipped my coffee. A legal analyst spoke next. What we're seeing here is a professional used like invisible ink, there when needed, erased when inconvenient. But the problem is, invisible ink doesn't stay hidden forever. They never honored me in their home, I thought, but they're quoting me on national television. Another ping. I glanced at my phone. Nico, they fear you now because you never needed them. That line hit like a closed courtroom door behind you. Final, echoing, heavy with truth. I replied, I didn't want revenge. I wanted release. I meant it. The power wasn't in exposure. It was in knowing they couldn't undo what had already unraveled. Their biggest mistake wasn't using me. It was assuming I'd stay silent when they did. Another text lit the screen. Gideon, can we talk? This got out of hand. I stared at it. Not with anger, just quiet recognition. I typed back slowly. No, Gideon, this was always in your hands. You just let it go. I didn't block him. But when his second message came, I let it sit unread. He could talk to voicemail now, or the press, or his conscience, whichever answered first. I pulled out a blank page from my desk drawer. Not a contract, not an affidavit, just paper, untouched. My handwriting was slow, steady, free of legal jargon. I wrote a letter. To myself. A declaration. A reminder. A promise. This wasn't about reclaiming what I lost. It was about stepping into what I'd never been given. Autonomy, visibility, peace. By the time I finished, the The sun had fully climbed above the trees. I folded the page in half, placed it in the drawer, and closed it gently. I'm no longer the ghost in their rooms, I thought. I'm the judge of my own life. I opened the group chat. Then, without typing a word, I left. Sunlight spilled across my lap as I sat curled in the corner of the living room couch, phone warm in my palm. The group chat buzzed with activity, message after message blinking onto the screen like confetti from a party I was never invited to. Vera was on a roll. Let's not let one moment erase years of family. One moment? My thumb hovered over the keyboard. I didn't type anything, I just watched. Gideon chimed in next. Maybe it's time we all sit down, together. I could almost hear his voice, measured, hopeful, like peace was a prize he deserved for staying neutral this long. I didn't laugh. I didn't cry either. I just sat there, rereading the words that meant nothing because they never had. Not once during the times I'd been excluded from photos, emails, meetings. Not when my name had been used without my knowledge. Not when I'd stood in a room and realized the people I married into had never seen me as more than a title with hands. I scrolled back up just to see how long I'd been in the thread. Years, photos, announcements, inside jokes. I remembered holidays where I'd cooked but hadn't been thanked. Birthdays I remembered, but weren't reciprocated. Baby showers I'd sent gifts to without receiving even a photo in return. They never noticed when I was missing. They only noticed when I finally spoke. Now they were loud. Because I had gone quiet. I opened the chat details, thumb hovering over Leave Group. The weight of it surprised me. Not fear, not grief, but a sort of reverence. Like I was walking out of a church I once believed in. Leaving doesn't break the bond. The bond broke long ago. I tapped. You have left the group. No explanation, no parting shot, no dramatic farewell. Just gone. And it was the most powerful silence I had ever delivered. The air around me shifted. Not lighter, not heavier, just cleaner. Like something had been unhooked from my ribs. I stood, walked to the window, and cracked it open. The curtains stirred with the breeze, and the scent of the neighbor's fresh-cut grass drifted in. They don't get to hold me in a digital room anymore. I'm not theirs to minimize. I turned back toward the house, not grand, not filled with artifacts of a curated life, but mine. Quiet, honest, lived in. And that night, I opened my drawer and found the photo they'd erased me from. The photo was right where I'd left it, beneath a few file folders in the bottom drawer of my home office. Still in the original frame. Still glossy. Still complete. The original, before someone in Zinnia's camp decided to crop me out for the public version that graced the family newsletter. I stared at it for a long time, not with bitterness, but with a strange sort of distance. Like looking at a version of myself that had almost agreed to be erased. They tried to edit history, but the original always remains. That morning, before the building opened to staff, I used my remaining clearance to access the boardroom. It was quiet, the lights automatic and soft, triggered only by movement. I stood in the doorway for a moment before stepping in, heels clicking on the marble tile. I wasn't trespassing. I still had keycard access. Technically, I was still listed as an advisor. That would change in 10 minutes. I approached the table where I'd once been made to sit at the far end, beside the catering station, without a nameplate. This time, I brought my own. I placed it in the exact center of the table, where Zinnia usually sat. A small golden plaque, discreet and unmistakable. Judge Morella Dalton, former advisor. No one was there to see it. That was the point. From my phone, I composed a single email. No greeting, no signature, no flourish. Subject, formal exit. My silence was never weakness. It was strategy. I resign from your history, while you drown in your consequences. I attached 6 PDFs, redacted, dated, annotated, enough to raise questions without answers, enough to ensure no one rewrote the story in their favor again. Then I hit send, CC'd the foundation board, the legal department, and 2 media contacts who'd left voicemails all week. Afterward, I walked out. No backward glance. The door closed behind me with the same finality I'd once heard walking out of a courtroom. The kind that tells you something has shifted permanently. By noon, I was back at my desk at home. A producer from a major network had left a voicemail, an invitation to join a televised roundtable on ethics and power, moderated by someone with a primetime slot. I didn't return the call. I replied by text. No more cameras, no more spotlights, just real work. Because that's what this had always been about. Not revenge, not reputation. Just the quiet recentering of who I was, without anyone else's permission. That afternoon, I pulled out the original photo again. This time, I reframed it, cropping out everyone but me. Not out of malice, but clarity. I hung it above my desk, right above the window. The nameplate, now resting in my drawer, faced the same direction. Sometimes, you don't need to be part of the picture. You need to own it. Some stories don't end, they echo. And when you finally speak, they listen.